many. I think some people might filter in as we go. We'll just start. See if people arrive. Yeah, I know it's a big art weekend this weekend, so it's good. We're all here. So I'm going to quickly introduce Lisa and her show, and then we're going to kind of just start the conversation with a few questions. If you guys have any questions, like feel free to jump in. We will maybe have a little time at the end for questions, but if something pops into your mind as we're talking, just yell it out. We're a small group, it's totally fine. So, Lisa Liedgren Alexandersson is a multidisciplinary artist based in Seattle, working in a range of media such as drawing, painting, photography, and weaving. Her practice investigates themes of materiality and the relationship between personal and cultural languages. She's a graduate of ENSBA in Paris and Beckman's College of Design in Stockholm. A two-time finalist of the Betty Bowen Award, recipient of the Artist Trust GBA Project Grant, and PONCHO, did they spell it out? Or did they just call it PONCHO? Okay. PONCHO Special Recognition Award, and a grantee of the French Ministry of Cultural and Foreign Affairs. Her work has been exhibited in the United States and Canada, and is featured in museum of private collections, including Seattle Art Museum, Tacoma Art Museum, Microsoft Art Collection, and Seattle University. And this is her first solo exhibition, Studio E Gallery. And also, while we're chatting, you guys might feel free to wander around and look at stuff too. But yeah, I was lucky enough to be hanging out in the space while Lisa was installing and started chatting about some things that maybe you want to know more. So these questions are kind of based off things I want to be here to talk more about. So the first one is one of your influences you talked about has been minimalism from the 1960s and 70s, and in particular, a couple of specific artists like Agnes Martin or Barnett, Newman. And I'm wondering if you could talk about why that particular group of work drew you in, like why did you choose that as a language to start this body of work with?
Well, I have a background in visual arts and painting and drawing, and about 5 years ago, weaving started to. I started to learn how to weave, and for a long time, for several years, I really explored and experimented kind of where it would take me. And so it ended up blending with my background as a painter. And I think, to answer your question, the material, I would turn to those artists and the type of work that inspired me very early on to just naturally just put myself in the field of making art and what I was drawn to. So very, very natural. Now, I think, so with this work, for the first time, I actually leaned in with more intention to really explore about what those artists, what was it about that. And I think really the notion of materiality and a certain notion of commitment to one material and just like fully try to remove everything that's sort of is not relevant to the making, to let that just fall away, and then just be in that very solo relationship with material. So I guess simplicity.
I mean, I remember yesterday we were talking about minimalism as not just being a certain like pared down aesthetic, but also just the minimal idea of just one material or one idea or one form, and then taking kind of exploring it as deeply as you can. It doesn't have to look like you think it should.
But I really think that, I mean, I never really thought of myself as an artist belonging to a particular, like this is my tribe, but I have to say that, and also that meant that I worked not feeling a sense of belonging. And that have worked in really, in both ways. But I really enjoyed to sort of just let myself, this, like fully just give myself to that and just see what that's like to work like with that sense of belonging, historically. And also, this work is it's all inspired from where I come from, too. So I merge that which is American history, right?
Yeah.
With this rural, south of Sweden visual language.
Yeah, and for people, just could you talk a little more about like where these designs are from and kind of like the history of them a little bit?
So, in my process of learning how to weave and taking classes and learning the craft and become familiar with the language of weaving, which is both, of course, about the material, but also a lot about the techniques. And I'm interested as a language, as a subject, to explore what different type of languages. And so I became very fascinated with these really refined designs and lines, horizontal and vertical, that obviously exist within the sort of just the pure pragmatic fact that when you weave, you have.
Yeah, it's like an innate part of the.
Right, so you're in that. And so that kind of made a connection with how I had worked with geometric shapes, structures sort of before. So what I began to do was just looking at the compositional aspect of these weaving instructions, and I started to convert them to drawings, and just to see what would come out. So many of these, particularly,
Is that the pieces on the back of the?
like all of those pieces on the back of that board are drawings based from text, language on these directives of use 10 threads here, use 30 threads here, and then I had to kind of do the math to figure out like what exactly is 30 threads.
So you were just going off written language?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And that became very exciting. Like I really sort of just, wow, what can, I don't even know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, well, it's like a music score.
Yeah.
It's like it's a language that represents another thing, which also represents a weaving. It's like 3 steps.
So then I chose one of those drawings to build this series with. So I used the title for this particular series is called Blue Fire, and Blue Fire in Swedish is called Blå eld, and that was the name of that weaving instruction.
Cool.
Silent, several of the titles are derived from the research, from this actual. It's very specific. I held myself very accurate to, particularly with those drawings.
And on this one, in the design that you used, depending on whether you approach the piece from this side or from that side, the way it's hung, you were either adding a stripe or subtracting a stripe. Can you talk about that as like a tracking, or like how that relates to the idea of it, like a music score or the passage of time?
It's interesting that you mentioned music, because I've worked with music as it being way back in my work. Because you and I never talked about it. So that piece back there is the number 6. Like that is the precise weaving instruction for blue fire.
Okay.
And what I did after and when I say precision, I mean the drawing in the back shows it, but then I took these compositional elements which are stripes and completely rearranged them. So there's a bit of a method to these, but in general, like that was a starting point to deconstruct it completely and build the image from that drawing.
Okay. And another, I mean, these remind me of like the Donald Judd stacks. It's like speaking in a very, just like the pieces on this wall have a really specific language of like Agnes Martin's framing techniques. But it seems like there's also another language you're borrowing from, which is the language of like presentation, like all the kind of iconography that says this is art, that sometimes needs to surround works, including minimalism, to kind of like point to the fact that this is what you're looking at, and it's everything from like the hanging height, like the piece in the front being hung low becomes a different object. So I'm curious to hear you talk about your relationship with that system of kind of calling attention to something as a piece of art, the kind of museum system or the gallery system of presenting.
Well, I think when putting this work together for this show, I mean, maybe a year ago, I was in a very different trajectory with work. And I got to this, what do you call it, the end of the road. It's like, this is not working. This has no, I felt really stuck on the loom. I liked what I was working on, but I wasn't interested, there was nothing that sort of carried my interest beyond the compositions. And I'm going to try to not forget your question. When it got interesting was when I was working on the loom at one point, and I was thinking about the notion of tension, because tension is really the fundamental principle when you weave. With no tension, you can't create structure. And with painting, and of course painting exists in there's so many different ways of doing it, but my relationship and the way I worked with painting was painting stretched on canvas, canvas stretched on wood. You got that tension. So I started to think about the tension, and I don't know if there's anyone who weaves here, but when you cut off a loom, cut off your weave, it just collapsed. And I've always been I notice every time I cut something down, like it's just like this, it all kind of just collapsing. It's kind of depressing. Actually, it's actually quite depressing because you right? So then the next phase starts when you prepare it for its next final sort of stage, however, what you ever do with it. And I really like that to sort of, I started to think about it, and I started to think about tension, and then I started to really think about my identity as an artist, and really which was a total identity crisis, because I didn't know really which world I belonged.
The weaving world and the painting world?
Absolutely, right, because I couldn't, and you could be involved, okay. But I know that, and this is the thing we say, right? I know that on a rational level. It's free. You can do whatever you want. But somehow, when I was able to really bring all those worlds together, that really are meaningful to me, like that's when I really started to feel that I was onto something really interesting for me, because I think it's that without a curiosity and that energy to want to put the work, the time in to do it. If I don't feel it's there, I can't go. Because that is what carries you. And so for me, I've always been very interested in sort of how we talk about art, like what makes a painting a painting. Not a new question. I'm not saying that I come up with an answer, but what I do, I feel incredibly free to go just between all these worlds and not making, to your point, like I don't need to choose.
No, and I feel like with you talking about the kind of minimalist relationships with choosing a material or a thing and really taking it through until the end and having that like deep investigation, you can look at it in different worlds. You don't have to, because you're kind of staying true to that one weaving or linen or that thing, you can, what does that material mean in the weaving world? What does it mean in the museum world? What does it mean in minimalism? What does it mean in object making?
Yeah. So it's really like holding all these worlds in parallel at the same time and kind of just play and see what happens. So it might look very strict by horizontal vertical, but I'm not very linear at all when I work. It goes in like many directions at the same time, and I did not know what this body of work at all would look like in here until very close to the opening. I should say. But that doesn't look like that. That is very true, and it could very well have been a much smaller show, too.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you talk about that, the use of that language coming out of the enjoyment of the tension of the piece on the loom and the kind of thinking of it as one kind of object and then another when the tension goes and it kind of becomes a soft thing. The piece around the corner here that's really, I think you said it was like pinned up on that board like a tapestry maybe in a museum, has that feel of like suddenly it's a lot about how it's being shown to you. I think that not the framing is the wrong word, but the like infrastructure that's being made obvious that shows the presentation of the piece in a really nice way. I'd like to hear you talk about that and then look at that piece. Makes a lot of sense.
Sure. And I am interested in rules, for sure. I mean, there are no rules, but there are rules, right? And as artists, we have these choices to make at all times, and we end up, I think, maybe reject rules, and that will be being in relationship to some kind of rules, whether it's our own or external or however it is. I was very interested with that piece because I was fortunate during the pandemic to spend 4 months in Stockholm at a weaving school, very, like the oldest weaving school. Like it's very, there are rules. I think that inspired a lot of this work. And so that piece, this freezing moment in the house, how you finish a tapestry. You have to stretch it, get the tension in. And I always thought it was such a beautiful, I never wanted to like cut it off. And for it to be this, here's the display of the finished tapestry. So I wanted to freeze the moment of that process with that. And so that's what that piece is very much about. So that's actually a step in that process, how you finish a tapestry. And then I use linen. That's the only piece that's only linen. And that was my reference to the very traditional canvas and linen canvas for painting.
I mean, having a moment of knowing that a piece is finished also makes me think like all these pieces, it's lovely to have a moment where you cut it off the loom because then there's like a moment of like now it becomes something else. But especially when I see the long weavings and know that these are like continuous, I think a lot about the labor making it all the time before that moment that you're like, and now it's finished and I can manipulate it in a different way. Like, how do you see the kind of investment of time in these, or is it like a way of tracking time? Is it not important?
I work with the theme of time in other works, painterly works, when I track the phases of the moon, and I use that sort of abstract language to create a narrative, personal or collective or historical. So time has, apparently it's it's there. I think today, I relate to time mostly sort of to enjoy what I do, right? So I'm not particularly concerned about how long time it takes to do. Although with this work I had to bring someone in, I had a studio assistant, which I hadn't had in the past because I realized I won't be able to finish it all by myself. And that was great. I don't feel like I need to do everything myself anymore, although I like to stay close to it. But I think the notion of time is interesting, how we think about it. Of course, these can take X amount of time, but in comparison to what?
Yeah.
It's like when we say that, when we think about things that take time, it's always in relationship to one's own idea about what time means. Like it's a very long time compared to make things really quick, which has its own quality too. So,
and it's funny because I feel like time and effort often get, those words then translate to labor, and then it translates to value, and then it starts going in this kind of weird way when it doesn't really apply to art objects in the same way, because someone could be like a calligrapher and they spend their whole life like getting to the point where they can just do that one thing in 4 seconds. So like that's just 4 seconds of labor. Like how do these things, like it's hard to compare it, but I noticed that there's like often a tendency for people to be like, that must have taken you so long, and that kind of like translates into the feeling of.
I do like the aspect of making. I like to make things that ask of me to commit, because let's say it takes however long time it takes to do this, right? It's like, am I gonna spend like my next 3 months doing this, or do whatever like that piece?
Do you only have one loop? Just like
no, I'm super proud. I have 7 small loops,
wow.
1 big and 1 medium. But I don't mind for things to take a long time.
Yeah.
If there's enough interest, it's like it has to take that time to finish it, like, because it tests my kind of commitment.
Yeah, does it stop you from waffling or like changing your mind, or is it just enjoyable to know that you have like agreed with the work that you will be dedicated to it for that?
Yeah, I think that's part of the joy to be in that relationship. I'm gonna invest in this. I'm gonna not. Well, I feel it's a lot about being in a relationship with material and with an idea. And if I feel the energy kind of drops, or sort of it's not really there, well, then that means that it's not really, then I turn the other way. And typically, a lot of work that I do, I think about it for quite a while before I start to have some clarity of what I'm looking for in the piece. So, but all of this work I really prototyped for many months, and then about 4 to 5 months was a lot of work,
Actually, but it's like the mental part. The thinking is work too. There's just the hands work and the brain's experience
Yeah.
working or kind of.
But I think what I enjoy in making work is when all one's capacity comes online at the same, not always at the same time, but I'm using my head. I have to think about things. As you know, when you set up a loom, it takes a long time, and you really have to know what you're doing. If we can work with looms in many other ways, that's easier too. But I like that I use it's a lot of actual thinking and counting and math.
Yeah,
and
there's some logistics there.
There's some logistics, and then there's a quality that is the complete opposite and unrelated and have nothing to do with that, but needs to be part of it too.
Yeah, I know that when we were chatting about your work before, you used the word precision a lot. And it seems like that precision or that kind of infrastructure allows you to have the other kind of thought going on at the same time.
Yeah, precision came up as a word very clearly on these pieces, the painted pieces, for instance, took quite a while because that rod that's built in, I worked with a woodworker, and our schedules were such that I had to decide back in April to commit to the rod to being in this particular space before I had actually finished the paintings. And I knew at that very moment that, all right, if I say yes, he said, you have to have it there for it to hold the piece, so it's, because there's steel there and it has to weight on it and so on. And I knew that it's like, by the time I'm going to hang that piece in there, how am I going to put it in? The backing on the piece was on there, and and it got very complicated. But there was a lot of just, those require certain precision, although it doesn't, I'm not looking for perfection. I just look for some clarity in sort of how to make things. And I enjoy that.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about your project, Weaving Pavilion? Just because hearing you talk about that, the unknown within the guidelines, it seems like that project was interesting.
Yeah, so in parallel to my practice in my studio, I work with the community, and I had started back in 2016-17 thinking about what it would be like to weave, bring other people into my weaving practice. So I started to experiment at the Seattle Public Library branches, and you can have a room for free. You can't advertise. You can't.
Do you have to ask permission, or can you just show up? I don't.
No, you book your room.
Yeah.
But you can't put it on social media. You can't promote it, right? And it was perfect because I wanted to go into very public spaces and see what would happen if people could come in and learn how to weave. So I set up these 7 smaller looms, and people that come to the library often comes to their local libraries, and they came by and people came in, and I had people weaving in age difference, 7-year-olds to 70-year-olds, and the next day I could see that 7-year-old had learned how to weave and was instructing, the other members. So it and then COVID hit, so the branches were closed for a long time, and then I got a grant from For Culture, and I set up this setup in a public park, volunteer park on Capitol Hill, and invited the public to come in and learn how to weave. And now, in September, I will host weaving gatherings at Newman City Park, down 5 minutes away. And so, for those gatherings, I set these parameters for weaving in a very simple way. The warps on each loom are a little bit different, but we're all using the same material. So I'm excited that there will be 4 weekends in September, and you will also come to come. Just, I can't, you have to follow me on social media, because I will put that up there. And Ursula here, my friend, helped to document the video documentation, which I have actually chosen not to show. And so I'm excited to really share that, so that will, yeah.
Yeah, and when you were telling me about the project, did you mention that people, when it was outdoors, were encouraged not to talk to each other, like to work in
Right, so I set up the loops almost like if you think about the chairs, well, in a circle, and I encourage, so I teach, or like I model, I'll show it's a very visual way of learning. It takes about 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and I do this in silence, and people look, and then all of us are moving in a sort of similar pace, and when there's a challenge or something that you need to learn, everyone will usually look, and it gets resolved, and we sit in quiet and move. And it was very fascinating. People learn very quickly. Yeah. And there was something, I got great feedback that it was also a new experimental type of space to be with others.
It's not often people are doing something side by side and not talking to each other.
And that's what I was really interested in, to find, I think it will create space that was different from that I had been in. Yeah.
Do you just,
I just had a comment on that. I remember from documenting the volunteer park weaving gathering that a number of people commented that they got into sort of a meditation with the whole process, and it was had a relaxing quality for people.
Yeah. And that was a very particular time too. That was during the pandemic in 2020. And we were able to sit 6 feet apart, and so that made it also really kind of an interesting setup.
Yeah, I think you said together apart, or like the idea of being together,
but
not being safely.
And it's also the parameters, and I work with rules here. I mean, I don't like, I would say parameters, but I didn't want it to become about, we talk about this, about techniques and this pressure of, am I doing it the right thing, the right way, and all these decisions. Yeah. So I helped to sort of set it up in a way where a lot of decisions are made, but there's also that person who leaves, who bring their own really unique, even if it's set up exactly the same, because of how we use our bodies and like use pressure, it's going to have these subtle differences. Yeah.
When you work on this work in your studio, alone or with the studio assistant, do you work in silence? Or do you? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Sometimes, if I have to be really focused, yes. When I do all my math. There are other aspects of when I listen to music.
Yeah, I always like to know if artists listen to music or a podcast or work in silence, because I think it can sometimes.
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, I got into a habit of listening to podcasts. I don't love to do that when I work, because I bring too many.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
It makes a difference. And I also don't want to consume that. I want to, when I listen to podcasts, I want to listen to it. But yeah, music has a big influence in my work practice. I would say I think it's closely tied to composition, for sure, on how to, with music and sound, the silence between the rhythms and all that, it's very, related to when you make compositions.
Yeah, I mean, this piece right here is not, they're not right next to each other, but the same spacing. This is almost got like a musical kind of rhythm to it in a way. I think maybe my last question is, why the dish towel? And I ask that because I feel like I have a kind of visceral memory of like dish towels as something like being small and looking at them on the oven thing, and just as like an object, like what drew you to that?
Well, I spoke about my fascination with this, with the work by these weavers back in South Sweden on books and so that I found. But I'm interested of the object as a towel and its meaning that it has had over time. I mean, we think of it as a dish towel, but it's woven cloth. Plain weave is the most simple type of weaving structure. It's 8,000 years old. So whatever cloth that then became the towel, with industrialization and why that format, and that it's an object that is shared between, for everyone. We all use it, right? Between cultures, and that's yet is still the same, and it hangs, and it's the same material as canvas.
Yeah, it's very recognizable.
And I love how it's sort of a material that we interact our body with, and it has different purposes.
Yeah. It's like kind of the ultimate utilitarian textile.
Yeah. And I am very interested in much of my work. I venture out in terms of process and putting a lot of ideas and so together, but I'm very, I'm quite interested, it's like right here, right now, in this very physical world, right? I'm not so interested because that has to venture, like to really stay in that and this other world.
So that kind of marries with your attempt to like stay true to one material, one thing, and kind of go to the end with it. Like it is a dish towel, which means something different to everyone because everyone has personal memories, but it's shared.
It's a personal. But one thing that I really loved about this work that I didn't know that I would return to painting, because I hadn't painted for quite a long time, and I didn't know that I missed it, but I did. And so, to me, like that's how close as I get to painting today, which is graphite on acrylic on canvas. I chose to not show work where I paint on the material that I weave, but I like how that the towel then actually brought me back to painting.
Yeah. Should we open it up for questions? Sure. If anyone have any questions?
You mentioned, also thank you for sharing this with us. This was really lovely, very interesting. You mentioned having several looms, and I'm curious, when you're not working to a deadline, do you like to work on multiple things at once? Do you just focus in on one? Do you do both sometimes? What's your preference?
Well, I noticed, that's a great question, because there was a moment in time with this work where I counted and I worked on 12 pieces at the same time, which was too much. where I realized like that's gonna stop.
Yeah, sometimes you have to find out.
But I would say normally I would work on 4 or 5 things at the same time. I love when I have always something I can turn to.
With these works in front of me, it seems that in terms of decision making, these were all very premeditated. You made the decisions before you get to the loom, and a lot of times when you're a weaver as well, so when you're at the loom, it's just, you know what you're doing, you're there, and you kind of go into a sort of meditation, or you remain very fixed on that. But you're also a painter, and with these works over here, I was just wondering to the degree that you were how you were making decisions as you were making the work, and if you see much change or how it changes your work, whether you're sort of, front-loading the decision-making process or making decisions while making the work.
It's a great question. I mean, the green piece over there, I had probably worked on to getting the right green, what I thought would be the green I was looking for. I've done a lot of mixes now, like there, and my plan was to use the white. Like that was my plan. And then there's a green pan, a bright green pan, like right there next to the white pan. And that was a perfect example, which I just took the green pan and did that. And it's like, okay, I mean, risk taking, right? But it's, for sure, there's some spontaneous, I wouldn't call that luck or anything. To me, like, that was exciting to see that green, because I intentionally wanted to stay very spare with colors in the space. So yeah, I think I try to recognize when there's an invitation to like not where the plan has to be followed, but understanding like when do I need to follow on my plan.
When are there rules and when are there no rules?
Right, yeah. I mean, I would say there are no rules.
Yeah. But you give yourself situations where there has to be some logistics. If you don't set up the loom right.
Can I ask, are these stacks of towels, or are they like one continuous?
So it is a long,
It's like long.
Yeah, so the piece that's in the back here, and I didn't really think about it when I planned to do that piece. It's about 280 inches. And that is actually the exact length of these.
Okay, yeah. I just wondered if it was a stack or individual house.
I got very excited. I did a lot of prototypes about how to make these, and I had put with different colors, and I will return to more of those colors. But as I developed these, I started to see that I can work with these geometric shapes and colors. Now, really, to get any of the colors here, and now I'm getting into techniques, but it's very much like in painting where you find your saturation or type of color that you're looking for. Weaving is it's not set up for that. Like you don't, because depending on how tight the weave is, like to get to that color and not let the warp come through, like I had to do a lot of tests, and it was quite hard actually. It looks very simple, but it was actually really elaborate to get to that, and to make sure that the warp color, which is white, that it doesn't come through.
Because if the tension is wrong, there's the color that you're choosing kind of gets too diluted by the white.
No, so for instance, like this is probably like 3/4 inch. So there's a language in weaving that when you do from weaving instructions, like end per inch, right? And so this is 40 end per inch, which is a lot. And it's a lot when you set up a warp that's like that long. That's 40 ends per inch, because like if it would be 10 nth range, it would not be seen as this matte, like this beige color. It would just be washed out by the tone of it.
What's the
And it's a strand.
one strand?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one strand. So I spent like a really long time to just figure out how to get the colors.
Yeah.
You know, to read as colors and not like a weed. So there's nothing towery about these pieces at all. I can tell you. That's a good question.
I'm just curious about, having said that with colors, like choosing what color you want. Like, how does that happen for you? Like, do you really have an idea of, is that the color you want? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. I have worked with the color yellow for many years because it worked. There was no need to change it until it's done. But I knew that I wanted to, of course, move forward, and so it's kind of an emotional process. Just like I like pink, I like this color. But I was thinking about the green color. Should it be blue? Should it be green? Like what other color? I didn't follow the reading instructions because they were suggesting colors. So I just have these. Probably, I think, as a painter, you have your colors. You look at them, and then I had all these yarn set up, and then just walk by week after week after week, and sort of which one speaks to me, like the green. And then it can become also very. I have to decide. I'm going to take this, and then I would question it. Then
right. So it's sort of an intuitive selection.
Yeah. Both, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, and then it's sort of, I'm going to take this, and I'm not going to question it either. Even to work, I've never worked with green before, really. So, in this way, so it's getting to know the sort of properties, if you will, the qualities of colors. I'm a little nerdy with colors, I think.
I'm really curious about the edges of the piece because, I don't know, the surface to me, even though I know it's woven, the colors seem so dense, they feel painted to me in this light. And then the edge,
that's good. That's all I was trying to get to with these pieces. All I wanted.
and then the edges, the way you see everything's folded on top of each other, are they folded over? I can't figure out what's happening with that edge of the fabric.
That's good. So they are folded, and I folded a lot until I could get to this sort of seamless quality, if you will, where it just looked very compact. But I did not know at all as I started this work that I wasn't thinking about, I'm going to do these necessarily folded pieces. That came about in the process of exploring. So my work, I would say, for this show, what's very new for me and which was part of developing and not really knowing how it would all come together, is that my pieces have become more object, more sculptural. And that was all new for me.
This piece in the back, that's also a continuous woven piece? And is that just a straight zigzag fold? That doesn't, is it just an accordion fold like this? Or?
Yeah, okay, yeah. And that particular piece is inspired. The very first piece that I did for this whole body of work was that piece is trying to replicate the paper hand towels. And I chose to not to have that piece in the show. I will probably show it at a later date. It was a very important piece, but for some reason when I came down here, it was just, no. Because it was meant to be next to it. So when that was in my studio, the hand towel pieces, like that was kind of prompted all this work, because that was the hand, that was the towel, that was not it at home, that was not domestic, that's like
It's almost institutional, but
absolutely.
like feeling it in school activities.
Yeah, and I loved how it sort of the square, the whole connotations to art history with the square, the sort of just edges and so on. So, as a perfect example, I look at those towels and it's like, how do I read that? I mean, that was the very first piece that I did. It's like, I had no idea that I would read that it would take 7 yards to get that. So some of the work, I mean, a lot of this work has taken on a life which is very, that I didn't count it for, which is very mathematical. Like I have to do math, and I have to count, and it's very spatial and has to do with weight. Like how much steel do I need to have for it to hang straight?
On me, because these are wood steel equipment, flat front.
So, and I've kind of embraced that aspect of the work. I think there's a lot there. That piece over there, the sunset, that's probably, and this doesn't really matter, but it's interesting. I mean, that's part of the curiosity to create the work. Like, how much paper does it take to fold that? And so that was probably 40 yards.
Wow, 40 yards. So that's one continuous strip that you hand painted with the colors.
Yeah, hand painted. Although I couldn't. That particular piece, I had rolls, and I have these. How many feet? Maybe 8, 10 feet tables in my studio.
Yeah.
So I just did as many as I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in scale, just noticing there's it's sort of a similar scale. I'm wondering about your decision making around that. Did you consider working larger, or did you have some intentionality around your choices?
Well, I realized having this show up that why did I make these? It's the first type of work of these folded pieces. I could probably have done them much smaller to just sort of ease into it.
You're like, in hindsight.
In hindsight, like I realized that my envision of what I was, I get fixated on a particular, like I want the accuracy of a hand towel, so whatever it takes to get to that. And in hindsight, it's just, I could have worked a very different scale. But now I think with this work, what it has opened up is really exploring smaller and bigger. Like I really, like that piece for instance, the installation in the back. That's the first piece where I'm working in a bigger scale. I wanted to work with a really tall space, but I allowed for this space to kind of see what I can do here. I don't know if that answers your question.